Have you ever noticed that in movies, it's always the villains seeking eternal life?
Our doctrine is probably the most generous Christian perspective on heaven and hell.
It's like an Adolf-shaped coloring picture at the end of the connect the dot image that you're doing right there.
It took me a minute to kind of hash out what it was, but it turned out that it was a suicide note.
Elders, I need to get Majelli to the hospital right now, and I need help. Welcome to Salty Saints. My name is Hayden Holm. This is my brother Tanner, and today we're going to be talking about cultural complaints. We're going to be doing a little bit of debunking, getting into some mission stories, and ending everything with some come follow me goodness. So sit tight.
And now for a cultural callout. We sure don't appreciate that.
Today's cultural complaint is the idea of turning off your religion. And I know that might sound a little weird, but let me preface and build it up with a story. So when I was a missionary, one of the first wards that I served in, the bishop approached us and he told us the story about some elders that had been there a couple transfers before us. He said, all right. He said, one Sunday, church was happening, the services were there, everyone was ready to go, but the missionaries weren't there. And he was like, what's going on? I don't know. He was worried. He's like, did something happen to them? So he talks to one of the priests and he's like, hey, can you go check on the elders and make sure they're okay? So the priests run over to the missionary's apartment. He knocks on the door. There's nothing. He peeks inside the window and he sees four elders playing Xbox. And he starts yelling at them through the window. He's like, hey, guys, what are you doing? And one of them comes to the door and he's just like, oh, hey, how you doing, man? He was like, yeah, I'm good. He's like, church is starting right now. And the elder was like, oh, didn't you know it's my birthday? And gave the air of having like understanding of like, oh, everyone knows that you don't go to church on your birthday. That's just ridiculous.
Of course.
And you know that elder didn't just adopt that mentality on his mission. That was something that he was probably raised with. And so I think this is a natural outgrowth of the church. I've seen it. I mean, personally, I've seen this. I've seen it with other people where they go on vacation, they go on holiday, and before that, they're telling their kids, hey, every single day you need to be taking care of yourself spiritually, reading your scriptures, saying your prayers, connecting with Heavenly Father, meditating, things like that. And then when they go on vacation, they're like, nope, toss it out the window. Not on vacation, not on birthdays, not on special occasions. It doesn't matter. And so,
well, you didn't get your 2 get out of church free cards when you renew your temple recommend. I swear everyone gets a couple of those at least, every other year.
I guess I must have lost mine or something like that. Maybe when they washed, they just kind of ran out. But
no, I totally agree with like the idea that's gross that when people go on vacation, they're going on vacation from their religion. Now, I am among the people that like going and trying to find another ward when you're out of state or when you're traveling. Not my cup of tea. So I might be falling into that group a little bit. But what we would try to do is like have like a moment as a family together, our own little church meeting, as you will, together on that Sunday and like, keep practicing our religion, which is a novel idea, right? But there are a lot of people who take vacation from their problems, right? And from their religion. And they just go and say, we're just going to party. And what kind of message, like you said, does that teach your children when you do that? It's like, oh, this is something that you can take off, right?
Right. It's almost like, it's like airplane mode on a phone. It's like you have religion mode. And it's just like, oh, we're going to switch that off when we're on vacation. And what you're teaching your children, and I feel like this is something that the previous generation kind of showed us. They're scratching their heads. They're wondering why their kids, the millennials, are leaving en masse. And it's because we were able to see the performative contradiction of someone that was saying, like, these are things you need to do every day. And then going on vacation, going on holiday, going in and just kind of doing little things like that. It's just these little erosions where they're able to see like, wait a second. So is it not like an everyday thing? Does God not exist on vacation? Does God not exist on birthdays and stuff like that? Or
does he come with you to Disneyland? How does that work?
Yeah. How is this all shaken down? And it's like, I'm not trying to come off as like a super orthodox letter of the law kind of guy here, but I am trying to point out the idea of saying one thing and then doing another thing. And then the kind of mental gap that will leave in the mind of a child. And it's kind of hard to reconcile that, Especially, I mean,
Yeah.
one of the most important things for millennials is authenticity. The idea of just practicing your religion when you're at home, when you're in your community, when other people can see you, that comes off as very inauthentic if you then turn it off wherever else you go. Because your religion is a lifestyle. It shouldn't just be something that you can turn on and off at a whim.
Oh yeah, and like at the very least, you can be honest with your children and explain the situation. You know, like,
Absolutely.
yeah, we should be going to church, but it's really kind of hard to find a ward in Anaheim. You know, and tickets were expensive. So like you can be honest and like share a little bit of your shortcomings with them if that's the case. You know, and just help reinforce the idea that this is what we should be doing, even if we're not attaining that at that time.
100%.
That'd be way better than what I grew up with, where it's like, oh, we're on vacation, it's gone. Like we clocked out hard.
It's done.
You know,
yeah, like we just did not do anything, didn't go to church, didn't say prayers, didn't do any of that, and it left me with some questions. You know, it made me realize, like, wait a second, do they actually believe what they're saying, or is this just a social club at that point? Because a social club is something that you leave and then you're going to go back to. You know, it's something that's fixed on a location. A religion goes with you no matter where you go.
Yeah, I really don't like that. And I can't believe he was playing Xbox. That's wild. There was a mission. We had a whole zone just kind of flushed out before us. And I was part of the replacement group. We just had an entire zone replace another.
Yeah.
We found out that the missionaries there, this goes right along with what we're talking about. They would plan out a meeting where they get together and they'd use their priesthood to release each other from their missions temporarily, go and do all sorts of terrible things, and then come back and reinstate their missions using, with these bogus blessings that they're giving each other. It's like, that's really clocking out. Like that's legitimately.
Okay, yeah, that's not clocking out. That's just apostasy. That's just 100% just apostate behavior. That's just like
it's so
apostasy.
bad. It was absolutely terrible. And once the mission, president found out, he rightly just had to like wipe out the whole zone. It's like, you guys all gotta go. In that terrible action, there's that seed or that belief that like, hey, I can step away from this if I need to, right? I can pause my commitment or something like that. So yeah, I really hate that about the culture. It really bothers me.
It's got some negative ramifications that are really ugly, because I think at a certain point, if a child is raised like that and they're raised to view that religion is something that you can turn off, you can turn on at certain times, and it's just you only turn it on when other people are watching, then when they are older, they might just say, well, forget it. I'll just move out of town and then I don't have to worry about this anymore. And then I don't have to go to church. I'll just always just have this button off, and it creates like this dual persona and stuff like that. It's just weird. It's just like, just live your religion, let it be an actual religion instead of just a club. And
it really bothers people, especially kids, because it doesn't make sense. They don't understand it, and you never get an explanation from that. I feel like boomers are a little bit to blame on that one. I feel like that's a boomer kind of thing.
Well, we don't want to put blame here, but if there were some fingers to be pointed, you're saying maybe they would be pointed in the boomers' direction.
Maybe we could start pointing there. How about we got to start somewhere. Let's just.
They have some splaining to do.
Yeah. They can. I'm sure they can do a great job of telling us how it's our fault, actually. So let's start there.
Yeah. Okay. So for that reason, we're calling out the culture and saying, all right, let's do better. Elder Bednar has said, if you're doing what your parents did, you're not going to make it. Like, you have to do better. You have to do better than what your parents did. Intentional, conscientious worship looks like not turning off your worship when you're on holidays and special occasions. So, well,
and to that final wrap-up point on that is that everyone who was raised with that vacation mode built into their religion, they went into that vacation mode during COVID, and most of them never came out.
100%. We call them COVID casualties. There were so many members that just got, and this is verbatim what they would say, is just, we got really comfortable with our routines and stuff like that. I think a lot of, it's kind of funny. I feel like there's a big part of them that thought that if they didn't go to church on Sunday, that they would get literally like struck by lightning, or that some horrible crippling illness would befall them or something like that. And when they realized that didn't happen, they were like, okay, well, why don't I just do this all the time? What am I making these sacrifices for? And and so a lot of them said, like, I was in the elders corps, they were telling me like, I just got really comfortable with our routines, and maybe we'll be back in a little bit, but for now, we're just we're really comfortable with where we're at, and it just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and once they weren't publicly shamed for missing or for being gone for long periods of times, they decided to sit in it. Just like, we're not coming back. So,
right. But I mean, a lot of times there isn't any public shaming that's going on as much as they perceive that there is public shaming. So it's like their perception that people are judging them hardcore because they're not attending their meetings or anything like that. It's like a lot of times that's a false perception. A lot of times people have a lot more on their plates to focus on rather than like, is this person going to church or not, and things like that,
Oh, 100%. And I think that, the mantra that I've come to live by is nobody knows what they're doing and nobody cares. If you live by those 2 points, you'll find out that like life is a lot easier and you can focus more on you and actually figuring out what you believe in and how to stand by it. Because there's a lot of perceived shame in the church that's not actually there. And there are some people out there who enjoy shaming other people. Like that happens.
There is some genuine shame. Absolutely. 100%. There are people out there that will shame you. But in my experience, it's way less than what people say. Like, I think more times than not, people are more loving and excited to see you come to church. The people, and this is coming from like 30 years of being in the church, 30 plus years being active in the church. More times than not, there are occasionally a handful of people that are like all on your case and stuff like that. But in my experience, people actually care about seeing you there. And if you're not there, they're not judging you. When you do come back, they're happy to receive you back. So for that reason, we complain about the church culture. So church culture, shape up. All right?
Yeah, be better.
Come on, church culture. Let's do this. Now, it's time to consider the path of your feet.
And now it's time to consider the path of your feet. For crying out loud.
We're getting into a video from Mormon Stories. And we're going to be talking a little bit about, we'll get your reaction and we'll talk about it from there.
Have you ever noticed that in movies, it's always the villains seeking eternal life?
Yeah, that's good.
Like,
that is good.
Yes. Like, it's never the good guy who's trying to find this hack to get eternal life, like Mother Gothel and Rapunzel. I mean, there's so many examples.
Voldemort.
Yes, where you're trying to cheat death.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out a way to live forever.
Right.
And I don't need that anymore. I definitely feel kind of at peace with just being present. And that's kind of another kind of a Buddhist thing, right? Where it's like, I can just be in today and I can enjoy like the feeling of like my cheek pressed against my husband's skin and the grass in my toes. Just the beauty of the earth,
Yeah.
I don't need eternity. I just need now.
That's right.
And I feel it just really releases that need to do everything right. Because I think I still want to be an ambitious person. And I still will try to be my best self. But I don't need to fulfill requirements for a heaven that not everyone I love is getting into anyway.
And that may not exist.
Right? Because even like a few years ago, I was starting to acknowledge like the model of the atom, right? I was starting to realize like, maybe we don't really understand what the eternities look like.
Yeah.
Like, I think we pretend we know a lot more than we do. The one thing I realized I don't need.
Okay, so we'll stop it there. There's a lot to unpack. I get this. This is a big video. Like, that was kind of a word salad. There was just so much there. But what are your initial thoughts?
Oh, man. Well, I think it's funny that, I feel like this position is actually just like a complete position of comfort to not need eternity. Right? To have your life be so good. Like, your life is so good that you can just have your heaven on earth right now. For the several thousand years prior, humanity has been praying for something better to come after their miserable life. And families have been working towards something greater and relying on this dream and this hope and this faith that comes with, faithful service and being a good person and working hard towards something, extending themselves into eternity. And that's not just a spiritual like matter. That's like a physical with your children. You're pushing yourself into eternity. Your genetic code is actually propagating. So I think that like this whole idea of like, I just need now and that's okay. It's incredibly like short-sighted, and your life must be really good if you just need now, like that.
Yeah.
The gospel is there to comfort people in times of trial and in times of suffering. And that's
There are a lot of
see the
people that
value in
cannot
that.
handle now. Like, there are a lot of people that are in such pain and anguish right now that now is too much for them, you know? And so, yeah, no, I totally get that.
100%. Another thing I noted, which I thought was really frustrating, and this is just me personally, I have a personal vendetta against Disney. And so to see her like reference all her
You're in
all
good
her
company.
literary references are she's like, all these Disney villains like want eternity. Like, yeah, well, try reading a book, you know, finding other characters that actually like, what about Jean Valjean, for instance, like this man who sacrificed everything because God saved him, right? Like he gave him his life to God. And because of that, he made a huge difference to generations before him. And he became protagonist of the story.
Oh,
Like
100%.
the fact that we're relying on Disney, which is such a weird parallel to people leaving the church, is this like obsession with Disney. I don't know. It's
I
feel like
doctrine
Disney
of
is
the
like
world.
a
It's like the canon of
Yeah.
the world is like sacred scripture to them is Disney and these movies, you know, which is
I
super
feel like
weird.
Disney. I feel like it's its own religion, to be honest. Like I feel like it's the handrail off the bus that people are leaning on as they step off the bus to heaven. So, like, yeah, it's weird to see these people kind of fill in Disney and like use it as like this proxy religion and referencing all these villains that apparently want eternal life now, which totally bypasses the point of what eternity is. Like, no
Well,
one's
you got to
sitting
fill that
here-
void somehow, you know. So I think Disney is the
well-
closest thing they can do to having like a spiritual experience, you know, because it's like it's got some good feeling kind of vibes to each movie that they put out. They used to create masterpieces, like Pinocchio, for example.
Oh yeah.
Phenomenal. The mantra there was like always let your conscience be your guide, right? And it was all about right and wrong and good and evil. And speaking of, she mentioned at the very beginning, like, have you ever noticed how it's always the bad guys who are seeking eternal life? And one of the things that came to my mind when she said that was like, well, have you noticed that it's always the bad guys who specifically profit off of naive kids? Ringing any bells? Like, there is this picture that I want to show you. So there was I'll start digging into some of my opinions on this video. So one of the things that I find super ugly is like, first of all, Mormon Stories in itself, right? So did you see the guy's eyes light up as soon as she made that connection? You know, like the Mormon Stories guy, he was
Very
like,
excited.
yes, good.
Like his own version of a supervillain, just like really excited about that.
It was creepy. It was weird. It was kind of a little scary. Now keep that in mind. You see this? This is for everyone out there. This is the coachman from Pinocchio when he's making the deal, and his face is super lit up, you know, and he's all evil and happy and stuff like that.
Oh, that's a good.
This is the vibe that I got from the Mormon Stories guy, like total coachman. Because guess what he's doing? He is sending this gal to Pleasure Island. He's saying, you have no rules, no restrictions for you. Get out there, grab some bricks, smash some windows, have some fun, have a good time. And I'm going to take you there, and I'm going to get a ton of money for it. So thank you for letting me profit off of your innocence and your naivety, okay? Because that's what he's doing.
Oh yeah.
He is the coachman. So I'll see if I can kind of find a fun nickname that I can name him that has coachman involved in it. But for now, I'll just call him Coachman.
Well, I think to that point, like if she's going to make that comparison of every villain trying to lock in eternal mortality, not really like eternal life, but trying to stay on Earth as long as possible. Every hero is sacrificing themselves for something bigger that they believe in, right?
Yeah.
Is exerting faith to the ultimate degree, to the point where they are sacrificing themselves or doing some amazing heroic act to help others in an effort to be more like Jesus. Because whenever you do something good, you are in essence becoming more like Jesus in that sense. So I don't know, this weird comparison about villains being, Mormons being villains essentially because they want
Can
eternal
we talk
life
about
is
that
like,
for a second? Like, she just
it's just
labeled
really weird.
everybody in our religion as a villain. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
let's take a step back from this situation for a second. If we were Jewish, they would be called anti-Semites.
Oh yeah.
Like, let me connect those dots for you for a second. Like, if your ideology leads you to believe in some of the same ideas that the Nazis believed, there's like an Adolf-shaped coloring picture at the end of the connect the dot image that you're doing right there. You know, it's like, wait a second, hold on. If these are your villains, and let's talk about your villains for a second. The villains are people that are having stable families, that are donating to charity every single month, that are giving fast offerings, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, helping people who are sick, volunteering countless hours in service projects around the world, as well as missionary efforts and stuff like that. All of that. So if those are your enemies, who are your heroes? You know, I would hate to see who your heroes are at that point. Like, this is just absolutely disgusting to paint an entire people as villains. And the really disgusting part was Coachman didn't even correct her on that. Like, he's sitting there from the viewpoint of perspective and experience, right? He's like this older guy. He's the kind of guy, he looks like the kind of guy that would give you unsolicited pickleball advice while you're playing. You know, like, hey, play up, come on, hey, dominate the net, come on. But he didn't say from the veil of experience and from that perspective or anything like that. He didn't say like, hey, well, you know, most of them are great, you know, and that's okay. He was just like, yes, villains. They are all villains. Yeah. You know, exactly. I felt like that was kind of weird. Like,
100%.
Are we as a people not allowed any kind of grace in society? Are we not allowed to have anyone like stand up for us, or are we not allowed it? Like, cancel culture was a thing, I get that, but like, where is it for us? Like, whenever it comes to someone dogpiling on the church, we are the last ones on the totem pole to have anyone just say, hey, what about those guys? You know, and I think that's kind of gross.
It is really gross. And I want to pick up on another point that she had there, which was she talked about fulfilling requirements for a heaven that her family's not even going to get into. So like, why even bother? And this one bothers me so much because like our doctrine is probably the most generous Christian perspective on heaven and hell that I'll ever find. Right? Like, for 99% of the people, their hell is going to be what we have now, but 1,000 times better. You know, like they're going to end up in the celestial kingdom, right? And they're going to have a life like mortality, but without evil. Like, that's for the most people. You know, outer darkness is not for everyone. It's not, you know, this hellfire is not going to be similar to what, you know, other Christian religions may preach. Like, the LDS doctrine on this is so kind and generous and reflects a kind and generous God, right? Who wants everyone to feel exactly comfortable in where they fit, right? So for her to be like, well, I'm not going to do the work, and that means I'm not going to get the best heaven, so I'm not even going to try. It's like, you weren't even entitled to it in the first place. You know, it's there if you want it, but if you don't want it, don't go for it. So this whole, like, as soon as people know that there are three kingdoms, they immediately assume that they should be in the top one, right? They immediately assume that they deserve celestial glory. And then as soon as they find out that you have to work towards that, they feel like something's been taken away from them. Like, well, you're withholding it from me because you don't give it to me right now. I mean,
so they created a binary where it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Right. Like, we're all deeply imperfect right now. Like, if we were right there right now, it would not be a fun place to be. That would be hell, right? Yeah. To go right now as you are in your imperfect self to the presence of God, that would not be pleasant. So the fact that she feels like she deserves to be there, but she also deserves to not have any requirements put upon her to prepare her to be there, is just
pretty entitled. Yeah.
It's very entitled, and it's very shallow thinking, right? They just didn't think about the doctrine a lot. You know?
Yeah.
It's very frustrating to me.
A lot of their arguments make sense if you don't think about them. So, like, the whole, like, these people are villains.
Turn off your brain.
It's like the villains that they pointed out. And also, can we also point out that Mormon Stories, I don't know if they paint themselves as unbiased or not, but it seems like they try and paint themselves as unbiased. But that whole interview was them just like, yes, slay queen, yes, you know, and telling them what to do. And then she was just like, hey, and you know, if my family can't get into that heaven, then I don't want to be there. And he was like, and it may not exist, right? You know, like this guy started stepping on her lines. You know, he was just like, let me just kind of feed you a little bit of what else you're supposed to believe now in the doctrine of Mormon Stories. Like, they have their own agenda and they're pushing it. That was a super clear example of that.
Well, this whole podcast is just a weird, like, gossip complaining session, you know?
Super weird.
I feel like, I mean, they paint it in a way like everyone is like venting out their trauma is kind of
like
the
a safe
portrayal I get
space.
here. Yeah, but like I just don't feel like church is as traumatic as people put it out to be. Like some people say mean things to you sometimes. Yeah, that happens. You're gonna get that in every institution that you ever participate in, whether it's religious or not. Like people are just terrible to be around. So like the fact that you had a bad experience,
you're in good company. I mean, I was a fat boy in middle school.
So
that was definitely not a safe space for me.
I ate the same cake you did, you know? And
that's right.
I was just talking to my wife about middle school gym class, and she's like, "This is a crime. We should not make kids change and exercise together in middle school when they're going through that."
You're setting them up for failure at that point. You know, it's
100%. Yeah. And so like,
but getting back to the point here, one of the things that I wanted to point out was like how their arguments are pretty shallow, because I mean the examples that they gave, and they added examples that she didn't even say. So that, I mean, I was like, man, all right, unbiased. I don't know, but
just kind of feeding it. Yeah.
But all of the examples she gave were people who were specifically trying to find eternal life in this life. Immortality in this life is what they were trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And there's like this famous ex-member of the church who's trying to do that literally right now. You know that guy who's like transfusing his blood with his son Talmage? You know?
Yeah, super fit dude. Who looks like a robot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, so there's somebody who's actively trying to do that now, who was a member of our church, but is not doing that anymore. Outside of that, I don't really know of anyone in this life who is trying to gain immortality in this life. It's all about the afterlife, baby. You know, and we are not scared of the afterlife. Unlike this guy who left the church, we are not scared of the afterlife. We look at death as just another phase of life. It's like, hey, this is just part of the plan for us. For everyone else, it's terrifying. Some people, it's too terrifying to think about. And so I think that's the case for this girl, because like she's focused into this like present mindset. She's like, I need presence, which is like, I get it. She's like, you know, and Buddha preaches presence and stuff like that. It's like he does, but he doesn't have the corner on the market of presence. Being present is a deeply Christian idea. I mean, Jesus said, you know, consider the lilies of the field. He was talking about how anxiety, stress,
take no thought upon the morrow, and
like that's not going to do anything for you. You know, it's not going to serve you. Be still and know that I am God. You know, those kind of verses. That's all about being present and not letting your fears take over the present moment and stuff like that. You know, be of good cheer, control your thoughts. Those are all things that are deeply Christian ideas that somehow she must have missed those Sunday school lessons or something like that. But she's got this kind of Buddhist belief system. And the thing about it, which is kind of funny though, is like, I don't know how much research she's been doing on this new religion. I don't know if she is Buddhist or not, but the thing is, the afterlife for Buddhists, what they believe is that this life is about karma, and that your actions are going to generate certain karma points for you. And then the next life is just you're going to be reincarnated either to a higher form or a lower form based on the amount of karma that you generated in this life, right? And so she's talking about a heaven that she's not going to be able to be with her family in. And then she's adopting like an ideology that is like one of the most radical, gradiented afterlives possible. You know, it's like, oh well, mom didn't pat me on the back one morning, and that took her down a couple points in her karma score, and so now she's going to be a twig bug in the next life. Darn it! Yes, and I'm going to be a heron.
Mole. Yeah, for real. I'm going to be a mole rat or something like that. Yeah, I mean, like, and it's fun to think about the whole karma thing, but like you said, like that's a lot more box checking and, you know, mental.
Like there's a much bigger clipboard with
there.
That ideology, you know, than there is with this one. You know, it's like, which just blows my mind. But it's just, it's a surface level. Back to what you were saying, it's all Disney. It's all just kind of what they've heard from people. Like it's they don't think about it too much. They don't get the horse out of the barn and actually ride it. They just kind of look in there. They're like, hey, there's a horse in this barn, so it's got to be just as good as all the other horses. And then you get out of the barn, you realize it doesn't really have legs, you know. And it's like,
It was Dane Cook who has a great joke about that, about someone who believes in reincarnation and kind of slaps him in the face with it, and then he essentially ends up telling him, "I hope you get reincarnated into a tree, and then I get to chop you down and print the Bible on you." Like kind of a thing. So I'll have to. I butchered it, I'm sure, but that was a great one. So yeah, reincarnation. It's a fun idea, but I just I can just hear the people now who are just gearing up to come at this idea of like, you shouldn't work hard for something that you don't know is there. But why not? Like the idea that you've wasted your life in service to others and in trying to become closer to God and trying to be more like Christ, more like your perfect self. I just don't see that as a bad investment in yourself. Right. You're not.
Well, it's not at all. Speaking of like other literary works, Dostoevsky, he wrote The Brothers Karamazov, where he kind of trots out these different ideologies. So there's like Dmitri, who's the hedonist, there's Ivan, who's an atheist, and then there's Alyosha, who is a Christian. And he kind of shows this big story about kind of how their ideologies help them navigate life. And the end of the story, it all ends with Dmitri, the hedonist, who is running from the cops. Like, his whole life has just been chaotic. He's been beating people up. He's been murdering people. He's been beat up. He's like loving different people and stuff like that. His life is complete chaos. A lot of wine and drinking and stuff like that. It's just like he has no idea where he is in life. He's just completely tossed about by the ocean of chaos. And then the atheist, Ivan, the end of the story, he drives himself mad into a fever just trying to figure out if God exists, because he can prove that the devil exists or something like that, because of evil exists. And he drives himself mad into a feverish state. And then the book ends with Alyosha, the Christian, who is just helping people. He's supporting people. He's helping people. He becomes a pillar of the community. Everyone really respects him and loves him and admires him, regardless of their ideology, because he's helping them. Like, his whole purpose in life is just to help, to support, to lift, and to instill virtue into other people through his example. And that's a fantastic book, and it kind of shows you the path of those, the feet of those different ideologies and where that's going to take you.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's a great reference. That's a great book too. I need to read that one again. That's because this lady, I can't even like follow logically her point through. She's saying she doesn't need eternity. She can just be present. But what happens if you have like a really bad day? You just live in that terrible day until you have another terrible, like, until the next day comes.
I'll tell you what happens. So here's the deal. This is the mantra of the gentle parent. Is like the whole idea of presentism. It's just like, hey, let me just you end up parenting your child. You don't parent the child. You end up parenting an emotion. And what I mean by that is, the gentle parent, what they do is they make sure that their child is always happy. And so they're parenting to happiness, and happiness does not care about you. Happiness is a terrible emotion to parent your child for, because it is the opposite of discipline. So discipline actually cares about you. Discipline will take care of you. Discipline will help you get where you want to go in life. Happiness is the opposite of that. It is the anti-discipline. A lot of times happiness, like, a child will cry because they want candy instead of like broccoli and vegetables and stuff like that. And so if you give them the candy, what's that going to do? It'll make them happy, but is it actually going to help them achieve a healthy, happy lifestyle? And overall, long term, it's going to make them miserable. Their teeth are going to get rotted out with cavities. It can give them heart disease. It can give obesity, which is the gateway to a ton of different diseases and stuff like that. And so that's why gentle parents can only handle like 1 or 2 kids, because it's like, true. I don't want to sleep in my bed. I'm going to sleep with mom and dad. There are no rules. I don't like rules. And the kids just kind of run around the house amok, and mom and dad are just hunkering down, just saying, oh, I need to just make sure that you guys are happy all the time, or else I'm a bad parent. There's this old joke about this guy from the UK who comes over and he sees American culture, and he says, I love how obedient Americans are to their children. And it's like that. This is where that ideology is going to lead them, is to this gentle parenting. Like, let's just live for the moment. If anything is stressful, let's forget about it. It's like that ideology is going to shoot your future self in both feet.
Yeah, well, I'll push back a little bit. I think the term gentle parenting got co-opted a bit. I think it's more passive parenting. Like, you're not actually parenting.
I call
You're
it
just,
pretend parenting. Is like
yeah, you're just
parenting. It's
cosplaying.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, in my mind, what gentle parenting originally was, which I think is more like compassionate parenting now, is that when you see your child suffering, you know, just like the scriptures say, you suffer with them, you grieve with them. You know, like, yeah, that's really tough that bad thing happened to you, but this is why, and this is what we do to get through it. You know, you can acknowledge the emotions they're having, but also like show that, like you said, discipline and consequences, those are a part of life that you have to build into yourself and you have to accept and transcend eventually. Which this lady is rejecting wholeheartedly, essentially. You know, she's just saying, I just want to live now. I don't want to invest in
I don't want restrictions. I don't want rules.
No requirements. There shouldn't be any requirements on my spirituality. There shouldn't be anything I need to do to grow in that way or be beholden to. I mean, how do you progress? You know, how do you progress if you're not pushing yourself in one direction or another? You know,
yeah.
I guess you just end up in this cyclical, circle of life where you become a fish the next time, something a little more nearsighted that's more your level, you know?
Yeah. Like a little goldfish, that can
like
think
a badger,
2 seconds at a time. Yeah.
something little like a squirrel, something can contain your attention span there. So I don't know. I really hope that she has more time to reflect upon the eternities, because that's the greatest gift that we have, is the mental capacity as humans to think beyond ourselves and to think of things bigger than ourselves. So good luck to her.
Well, it kind of goes back to similar to last time. I do not fault this girl one bit. Like, the ideology that she's adopting is mainstream. It's been pushed out by the culture. It's being pushed out all over the place in social media. Influencers are pushing it out. So the idea that she is reciting more Harry Potter and more Disney movies than she is scripture kind of tells you where she's been worshiping, like who her God has been, And so she has just been kind of so I don't fault her. She's just experiencing the natural end of the work that she's put into her religion at that point, So who's to blame here? It's these Mormon stories. It's the coachman. It's the coachman guy, because like he and I assume it's his wife or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
she looks like she could run a mean HOA, and so he and his wife are just. Did you hear the amount of yes and right, and that's absolutely right? There was no pushback. There was nothing like that. It's like these guys could probably see where the path of her feet are going to take her, and they did nothing. They absolutely did nothing to help her out. And so I think that's that's disgusting.
Well, they're not invested in her. This is, I mean, she might not like this, and most people don't, but the people who are shaming you, at the root of their core, there is a part of them that care about you. There's a reason that the people that are creating this toxic culture at church in some areas of the church culture, at the root of that is a desire to be more like Christ. It's corrupted and twisted and imperfect for sure. But these people who are on this podcast with her, they don't care. They're going to forget about her the second she leaves. They've used her for content, and that's cool, I guess. But she's going to go about on her way, and probably like every other person who's left the church, create an Instagram account about it, and check out the Amazon links in her bio. So I don't know, like that's it's just a machine. They use people who have had traumatic experiences and push them out of the church along the way, and get some views out of it. So cool.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap it all up, there's this quote from President Nelson. He, in one of his recent addresses, he asked the question. He said, "To whom or to what will you give your life?" That's the question that everyone spends a lifetime trying to answer, And so, going back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation about having nobility and like these great stories that can inspire us. One of the great stories that has inspired me is Horatius. I don't know if you've heard about it. So it's this big poem, and it talks about this town and there are a couple of opposing armies that are coming to wipe out Rome, essentially. And Horatius is the captain of the gate. And basically, he sees that these opposing forces are going to overtake the city and destroy everyone if they can overtake the bridge. And so they set about trying to knock this bridge out. They realize that they're not going to be able to knock it out in time. And so they ask for volunteers. They're like, hey, is there anyone who can go out there and buy us some time? And Horatius steps up as the captain of the gate. And there are a handful of lines that I've memorized because I found them so powerful and so meaningful. So let me pull up the image here. So this is Horatius, kind of some of the drawings of Horatius here. So basically the lines go, then out spake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate, to every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late, and how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods? That's something that actually moves me. That's something that inspires. And this is somebody who put his life below the needs of other people so that they could honor their ancestors and honor their worship. And I think that is something that is lost in the postmodern society.
Yeah, I mean, you take that beautiful ballad that you just recited, or that part, that gives you a glimpse into eternity. It gives you, someone who's becoming something bigger than themselves. And then you compare that to our modern, mainstream ideology, which is YOLO. Like that's it. Yeah. That's it can all be summed down to that stupid acronym of you only live once, so just, be as selfish as you can. You just eat as much ice cream as you can. Watch, to intake all the pleasures that you can, and just,
throw off anything that makes you uncomfortable. Get it out of your life.
Eat, drink, and be merry. That's really the ideology there, and it's really disappointing. I was hoping that our generation could create something as beautiful as that, but apparently you can't. That's not.
Well, we've got Harry Potter. So
right, we've got Disney. That's our capstone contribution to history, which is really sad. So
super sad. Okay. So we're now going to get into mission stories.
And now, Tales from the Mission.
I'll start off. So this was in my second area. There was this woman. She was a member of the church. Her name was Belen. And Belen was awesome. She was kind of I think she was in her early 30s. She had a young child named Magelli. And Magelli was about 3 years old. One night, we were about to go home, and we get this frantic call from Belen. She called us up and she said, "Elders, I need to get Magelli to the hospital right now, and I need help. Can you help me get her there?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so we ran over to her house. And she had packed everything up. She had Magelli ready to go. And so we're like, all right, let's get out of here. The thing is, it was so late at night that the buses had stopped running. And the hospital was in the next town over. And so without a bus, we weren't going to get there on foot. So she said, what do we do? We decided to say a prayer. So we said a prayer. And we were like, please help us get there. Please help us find a way to get to the hospital. And as soon as we said amen and opened our eyes, a taxi cab pulled up right next to us and said, "Hey, can I take you guys somewhere?" And we're like, "Yeah." They start loading up into the taxi. I pulled my companion aside. I'm like, "How much money you got?" He's like, "I'm out of money." And I looked into my wallet. I only had 30,000 guaranis, which is roughly like $3. And a taxi is not going to take you anywhere for $3. And so I told the taxi cab, I said, we need to get to this hospital in this next town over, but I only have 30,000 guaranis. Is that enough? The guy said, give it to me. It's going to be fine. I'll take it. And so he took it. He got us over to the hospital, and everything worked out just fine. And so that was a really powerful moment to me, kind of going back to the cosmic timing of everything. It's like there's a very specific plan that God has for every single one of his children, and that he cares about us, our concerns, our worries, and stuff like that. And he's going to put people in our path to help us. And he's going to make sure that miracles happen so that we can see his hand in our life, and so that we can pursue the path that he's laid out for us.
That's incredible. Yeah. And, I've never been to a third world country quite like that, and to experience things like that. But, taxi cab drivers, from my experience, are not charities.
No,
they don't. No. They don't give people rides because they're bored. For pennies.
We never saw taxis in that area. It was always just buses. So it was really random that a taxi just drove up.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a great story. I have a story. I'll just dive in.
Go for it.
We were knocking in a neighborhood, and it was a neighborhood that we didn't want to be in. I think we got off the wrong bus stop or something like that. It was known for being like really kind of a dangerous place to be. So we decided that we'd just wait for the next bus. We saw an apartment building. My companion pointed it out. I didn't know that it was an apartment building. I thought it was empty. I thought it was condemned. It looked really bad. So I didn't know there's people in there. So we went in there and we went to I told him like, we only have time to like knock like one door. So just pick one. So we went all the way down to the hall and we picked the left one instead of the right one. And we immediately started hearing two men in the door behind us, like hitting the wall and yelling at each other. Like there's some kind of domestic altercation happening between multiple men in the other apartment. So we were just really hoping that this guy would open up so we could go in so we wouldn't, get caught up in something scary. So once we did go, this guy opened the door. It's just a single guy. He had no furniture. He had one couch and one coffee table, and the rest of the apartment was empty. And he invited us in, and he asked us if we wanted water. And my companion was very new to the mission, so he's like, "Yeah, sure." I was like, "All right." Like he has nothing. The guy had one cup, so he went into the kitchen. He was washing out his cup, and we were sitting on the couch, and I saw a notepad on the coffee table. And it's one of my vices that I can be nosy sometimes. So I started, glancing at the notepad, and my French wasn't good at the time. So it took me a minute to kind of hash out what it was. But it turned out that it was a suicide note, that we had interrupted him writing the suicide note when we knocked on the door, which was crazy. So my mind kind of spun for a minute. And when he came back, he had some questions about us about like, what does it all mean? Like what's going on? And my companion, he was dead set on teaching about the Book of Mormon, right? He's like, it's all about the Book of Mormon. And I kept nudging him and saying, no. This is about a greater plan that God has for us. And the importance that we have of this life, to cherish it and to, feel his love, and the what comes after, and how great it can be. This internal gift that he's given us. So I tried to pivot to the plan of salvation. And it took a minute of kind of like toe nudging and like knee tapping to like get my companion on board,
Some
like
coffee.
Hey, it's not about the book right now. And we brought it, we gave him a Book of Mormon. We asked him to pray about it, and we shared some passages from it. But, we took that moment of revelation to say like, this guy, and he asked many questions of like, why should I care? Why should I care about anything? What's the point? Religion's useless. And we were able to share our testimonies about, God's love and the fact that there is a plan, which he wasn't aware of. He had never heard that he was here for a reason. And that's what really shook him. And we heard from him like 2 or 3 months later. And the fact that we heard from him meant that he didn't follow through on that suicide note, which was great. Even though he didn't end up coming back, coming to church or getting baptized or anything like that. Just the fact that we got to hear his voice a couple months later was good enough for us. So yeah, there's value in eternity, something that keeps coming up in this episode here, which is great to see.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible that you were able to give him maybe a couple extra months.
At
life,
least.
At least, and that's great.
And a book to read, So sometimes that's all people need when they're feeling really down, right? Like to this point about this video that we just watched, like living in the now can be hell. If he was in his own personal hell. And
he needed to know that things would get better in the future, and sometimes all it takes is just something super small, something small, as small as just like reaching out and saying, hey, can we share a message with you? It's like sometimes that can be a game changer for people. Just hearing an inspirational, uplifting message that tells people that there is hope for you and that there is somebody who cares about you. Yeah,
look, like I wish the story was like that he got baptized and became, the next prophet. That'd be an awesome story.
That you had your Leahona moment. Yeah.
Yeah, like I preached with such spiritual power that, his whole life was changed. But, the case was that we were there long enough to interrupt that dangerous train of thought that he was having.
Yeah.
And we were able to share with him that we loved him as children of God, from one child of God to another, and that we planted the seed of an idea in his mind that he has value, right? And that's something that is not inherent to the human experience, that, Christianity teaches people, that we take for granted everywhere we go. Even these people who leave the church, I feel like, take that for granted. Yeah. That we teach a very solid principle, a very foundational principle, that every soul has worth. And that little nudge helped him shift directions, at least for a little while. So
that's fantastic. On that note, let's get into some Come Follow Me.
And now it's time for This Week in Come Follow Me.
This is the back of the chapel version. This is the back of the chapel
That's
podcast.
Right. Yeah.
This is you came in with your kids,
right.
after sacrament.
So. Yeah, no, absolutely. We're at the back of the chapel. We're giving you last week's lessons. That's what we're all about.
Exactly.
So I'll go off of some of my insights from last week first, and then we'll kick it over to you if you have any. So last week was kind of interesting because we were talking a lot about the actual ordinances of like the sacrament, the purpose of the sacrament, and things like that. And so I want to dig into a little bit of some of the symbolism that may be missed in kind of a modern take that I absolutely didn't know when I was a kid being raised in the church, but that I learned later that kind of gave me some new perspective. So in the ancient Israelite temple traditions, whenever there was whenever somebody needed to make a sacrifice, or like an atonement, or for a sacrifice for sins, or a cleansing, or something like that, so they would bring an unblemished lamb to the priest, and the priest was someone who was from the tribe of Levi. And so they were given this authority to sacrifice this lamb. And so what they would do is they would kill this lamb, and then they would put the body of the lamb, they would break it on the altar. And the altar was actually like a big barbecue in the courtyard of the temple. And so there was a fire in this barbecue. It would actually cook the meat, and then they would sprinkle the blood over the meat. And so after that, they would take this meat, and they would break it, give it to the temple patron, and they would eat it themselves. And so there's a ton of symbolism in there. So contrast that experience with bread and water, right? So there's a sacrifice. There's kind of an idea of an altar that we have in our chapel that is where that body and the blood is placed, and where the fires of the Holy Ghost can come down and bless and sanctify that as it is, and then it is passed out to share a meal with everybody in the congregation. And one of the things that is interesting about the Middle East is one of the customs that they have is if you are eating with somebody, sharing a meal with someone, it actually sends a sign to everybody else who can see that you are one with that person. So they will not eat with you if you are not one with them. And so there's just a lot of symbolism going on there. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I did want to kind of call that out. That might be able to help you shift your mentality as you're partaking the sacrament, to focus on the idea that this is an ancient tradition. This isn't just something that some kooky guy cribbed from other religions and just kind of hodgepodge together. This has ancient roots, and it has deep symbolism in it. And that can be very powerful. And those symbols can help guide you into a more meaningful worship.
Oh, absolutely. I think that we fail to connect the dots sometimes with sacrament to realize that we're doing it. It's a community act too, right? Like you said, it's like sharing a meal with your entire ward. And it's important to realize that you are partaking in the atonement with the people around you.
Yeah, in Spanish, they call it La Santa Cena, which basically means the Holy Supper.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like you said, sharing a meal with someone is deeply intimate, right? It's a very personal experience. So to share a meal with those around you to help come together as saints should be something that, it's something that we take for granted, that we shouldn't, because this now more than ever, we should be gathering as saints and having each other's backs when we are coming into the world and sharing what we believe. So I think that's a great perspective.
100%. Yeah. Awesome. Well, did you have anything?
I mean, I have a couple cultural complaints. I don't know why we don't see the value of having like, you know, the paper cups and the tap water and like the Wonder Bread. You know, I mean, make sacrament a spiritual experience by using good bread and clean water. You know,
I tell you what, in my last ward, we had a couple that owned a couple great Harvest bakeries, and they were like, "We've got the bread," and it was some of the most delicious bread, and it actually elevated the sacrament experience. You know, it was like, wow, this is actually really good. You know, because you actually looked forward to it at that point.
There's so Hannah she volunteered and she makes the bread for our ward, and the first week we switched over to her bread. There had several people came up and she's like, I haven't felt the spirit that strong in a long time. It's like, yeah, it's good bread, right?
Yeah.
But then another cultural point is we subsequently got a complaint from one of the parents of one of the priests saying that the crust was too hard to tear. And if we could make different bread, that would be nice.
Oh,
like, I'm sorry. If your hands aren't strong enough to tear the sourdough bread that someone painstakely
that is a
made
complaint that can only happen in 2024. You know, it's like, oh my word! Like, what a postmodern complaint to have.
Yeah, like you just, I want to send him one of those gripper, you know, strengtheners. It's like, here, buddy, like, if you can't tear your own bread, like we have a problem. So, but no, I share the sentiments that you do, that the sacrament is probably one of the most least understood like ceremonies and rituals that we partake in. And overall, the Old Testament is just something that we don't study nearly as deeply as we should.
Well, one thing to consider is that the Old Testament, so that sacrifice was made in the temple. They were technically in the temple when they made it. And so one thing and the brethren have announced this in leadership trainings, is like, consider the chapel as an ordinance room and treat it respectively. Okay. So it's like, so look at your Sabbath experience, your sacrament experience, as basically a temple experience that you have every week. And that's something that's super powerful, you know, because it's like, that is a weekly ordinance that you can have. And technically it is an ordinance room, similar to like all the other ordinances outside of baptism are happening in the temple, you know. And so that can be pretty powerful as well. All right, with that being said, I guess we'll see everybody next time. I'm Hayden Holm, and this is Salty Saints.